It was a Thursday evening when everything changed between my boss and me. I'd been working at Patterson Marketing for just over 8 months, and in that time, I developed what you might call a complicated relationship with my supervisor, James. He was straight, married with 2 kids whose photos adorned his desk, while I had been out at the company since my interview. We worked well together professionally, no question about that. James had this way of pushing our team to excellence without being overbearing, a rare quality in management that I genuinely appreciated. But there was always something else there, a kind of tension that I couldn't quite name but felt acutely whenever we were alone together. That particular Thursday had been brutal. We were finalizing a pitch for a major potential client, and the entire team had been working late nights all week. By the time we wrapped up around 9 p.m., I was exhausted. My eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets and presentation slides, and the thought of catching the bus home felt almost unbearable. I was packing up my laptop, mentally calculating how long it would take to get home, when James appeared beside my desk, car keys jingling in his hand. "Need a ride home?" he asked casually, as though this was something he offered regularly. It wasn't. In the 8 months I'd worked there, he'd never once suggested driving me anywhere. I looked up at him, momentarily confused by the offer. James was standing there in his rolled-up shirt sleeves, tie loosened, with that half-smile that always made me feel slightly off balance. "Oh, I stammered, trying to process whether this was a good idea. "That's really nice of you, but I don't want to put you out. I live in Westridge." Westridge was about 20 minutes in the opposite direction from where I knew James lived. "It's no problem at all," he insisted. "After the week we've had, the last thing you need is to deal with public transportation. Besides, I could use the drive to clear my head before heading home." There was something in his expression I couldn't quite read, a kind of intensity that made me both nervous and curious. Let me explain why this offer mattered so much. In a professional context, there's always this invisible line between personal and professional relationships. When your boss suddenly offers to drive you home, that line starts to blur. It's not inappropriate exactly, but it shifts the dynamic in ways that are hard to predict. There I was, tired and vulnerable after a long week, faced with a decision that seemed simple on the surface but felt weighted with implications I couldn't fully articulate. I hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded. "If you're sure it's not out of your way, that would be great." "Thanks." I gathered my things, suddenly self-conscious about every movement. Was I reading too much into a simple offer of convenience from a boss who was just being kind? Probably. But something about the way he'd been looking at me lately made me wonder if there was more to it. The office was nearly empty as we walked to the elevator together. Our footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway, and I became hyper-aware of the space between us. Not touching, but close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woody and subtle that I'd noticed before in meetings when he leaned over my shoulder to look at my work. "The team did great work today," James said as we stepped into the elevator. "Especially you. That consumer behavior analysis you put together really strengthened our position." "Thanks," I replied, feeling a flush of pride mixed with something else I didn't want to examine too closely. "I think we have a good shot at landing this account." The elevator descended, and we stood in silence for a few moments. I stared at our reflections in the polished metal doors, James, tall and confident in his business casual attire, and me, slightly disheveled after the long day, my tie long since removed and stuffed into my bag. We looked like what we were, boss and employee. But something about seeing us side by side in that confined space made the dynamic feel different, more personal somehow. The parking garage was dimly lit and nearly empty when we arrived. James led the way to his car, a sleek, dark blue sedan that perfectly matched his practical but successful image. He clicked the remote, and the lights flashed as the doors unlocked. There was that brief, awkward moment when I wondered if I should open my own door or wait for him to get it. But he was already walking around to the driver's side, so I quickly slid into the passenger seat. The interior of his car was immaculate, smelling faintly of leather and that same cologne. Classical music was playing softly from the speakers, something I wouldn't have guessed about him. As he started the engine, I gave him my address, watching as he typed it into his GPS. "Should be about 20 minutes, he said, pulling out of the parking space. "Traffic shouldn't be too bad this time of night." The first few minutes of the drive were filled with work talk, rehashing elements of the presentation, discussing strategies for the follow-up meeting next week. It was comfortable territory, and I felt myself relaxing a little as we navigated through the downtown streets. The city lights streamed past the windows, creating a kaleidoscope effect that was almost hypnotic after the long day. As we approached the highway that would take us directly to my neighborhood, I noticed James glancing at the GPS, then signaling to turn right instead of left. I frowned slightly, looking at the map on the dashboard screen. I think the turn to Westridge was back there, I said, trying to keep my tone casual. James nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I know a different route. Takes a bit longer, but it's calmer, less traffic, nicer drive. He glanced over at me briefly. Hope that's okay. After days like today, I find the scenic route helps me decompress. Here's where things got interesting. The logical part of my brain registered that what he said made sense. Who doesn't prefer a calmer drive? But another part of me immediately went on alert. Was this just an innocent preference for a more relaxing route? Or was there something else happening here? Was he deliberately extending our time together? Sure, that's fine, I said, trying to sound nonchalant while my mind raced with possibilities. I looked out the window as we turned onto a tree-lined street I didn't recognize. The houses here were larger, set back from the road, their windows glowing warmly in the darkness. It was indeed a nicer drive than the utilitarian highway route I usually took. So, James said after a moment, you've been with us for what, 8 months now? How are you finding it? And I don't mean the corporate answer you'd give in a performance review. There was a smile in his voice that made me turn to look at him. His profile was illuminated by the passing streetlights, strong jaw relaxed, eyes focused on the road. This question felt different from our usual work conversations. More personal. I considered how to answer, aware that despite the casual setting, he was still my boss. Honestly, I love the work. The team is great. It's challenging in all the right ways. I paused, then decided to add something more authentic. Sometimes I wonder if I'm pushing myself enough, though. If I'm taking enough risks. James nodded thoughtfully. I've noticed that about you. You're incredibly competent, but sometimes I think you hold yourself back. You have instincts you don't always trust. He took a right turn onto an even quieter street. What kind of risks are you thinking about? The conversation was veering into territory that felt both exciting and dangerous. Was he talking about work, or was there a subtext here? I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of how close we were in the confines of the car, how intimate this setting felt compared to our usual interactions in the office. I guess I mean creative risks, mostly, I said carefully. Sometimes I have ideas that feel too out of the box, and I talk myself out of sharing them. You should share them, James said, his voice lower now. I'd like to hear them. All of them. There was something in the way he emphasized all that made my heart beat a little faster. We were driving through a part of the city I barely recognized now. Upscale residential neighborhoods giving way to a parkway that wound alongside a river I didn't even know existed in this part of town. The moon was reflected in the water, creating a silver path that paralleled our route. It was undeniably beautiful, and undeniably not the most direct way to my apartment. I didn't even know this was here, I admitted, gesturing toward the river view. How did you find this route? James smiled, his eyes still on the road. I like exploring, finding the paths less traveled. He glanced at me briefly. Sometimes the most interesting journeys happen when you're not trying to get somewhere as quickly as possible. Was he still talking about driving? I wasn't sure anymore. The air in the car felt charged with something I couldn't quite name. I was acutely aware of every movement. The way his hands rested on the steering wheel, the slight tap of his fingers when the music changed to something with a stronger rhythm, the way he occasionally glanced in my direction when he thought I wasn't looking. Tell me something I don't know about you, he said suddenly, breaking a silence that had stretched between us. Something not on your resume. I laughed nervously. That's a dangerous question to ask your employee. We're not in the office now, he pointed out. Just two people taking the scenic route. I considered what to share, something personal, but not too revealing. I used to compete in ballroom dancing in college, I said finally. Not many people know that about me. James's eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. Ballroom dancing? That I wouldn't have guessed. Were you good? Good enough to win a few regional competitions, I admitted. I love the discipline of it, the precision. And there's something powerful about moving in perfect sync with another person. I can imagine, James said softly, and again I felt that charge in the air between us. What made you stop? I shrugged. Life. Career. The usual suspects. I paused, then decided to turn the question back to him. What about you? What's something I wouldn't know from your company bio? He was quiet for a moment, and I wondered if I'd overstepped. Then he said, I write poetry. Terrible poetry, probably, but I find it necessary sometimes. This revelation stunned me. James, with his data-driven presentations and strategic business plans, writing poetry in his spare time? What kind of poetry? I asked, genuinely curious now. The kind you hide in desk drawers and never show anyone, he said with a self-deprecating laugh. Then, more seriously, the kind that tries to make sense of the things we feel but can't say out loud. The implications of that statement hung in the air between us. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and looked back out at the river, which was now widening as we followed its course. We were definitely taking the long way now. We had to be at least 10 minutes past the point where we should have reached my apartment. Just as I was about to mention this, James said, I should probably tell you that I'm separated from my wife. Have been for about 3 months now. This information hit me like a physical force. 3 months? That would mean he'd been separated almost the entire time I'd known him. I'd seen him wearing his wedding ring at work. I'd heard him mention weekend plans with the family. There had been no indication whatsoever that his marriage was over. I'm sorry, I said automatically. Then, why are you telling me this now? James slowed the car as we approached a viewpoint overlooking the river and the city skyline beyond. He pulled into the small parking area and turned off the engine, though he left the music playing softly in the background. Then he turned to face me directly for the first time since we'd gotten into the car. Because I've wanted to tell you for weeks, he said simply. Because it felt dishonest not to. And because, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because I think there's something happening between us that we haven't been acknowledging. There it was. The thing we'd been dancing around, suddenly made explicit. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I should have been prepared for this moment. Part of me had sensed it coming from the minute he offered me the ride. But now that it was here, I felt completely unprepared. James, I began, not even sure what I was going to say next. You're my boss. I know, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. Believe me, I've reminded myself of that fact repeatedly. It's why I haven't said anything before now. It's why I probably shouldn't be saying anything now. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of vulnerability I'd never seen from him before. But tonight, driving you home, taking this route, I realized I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel. I looked out at the city lights reflected in the river, buying myself time to think. The professional part of me knew exactly what I should say. Thank you for your honesty, but this is inappropriate, and we should maintain a strictly professional relationship. The human part of me, however, was experiencing a complex mix of emotions, surprise, confusion, and yes, a flutter of excitement I couldn't quite suppress. I don't know what to say, I admitted finally. This is complicated. James nodded. I know it is, and I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed you to know where I stand. He looked out at the view, his profile strong against the backdrop of city lights. I respect you too much to keep pretending. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his confession hanging between us. I was acutely aware that how I responded in this moment could change everything. Our working relationship, my career trajectory, possibly even my personal life. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I'd be lying if I said I haven't thought about it. I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. About you. About possibilities. I turned to look at him directly. But I've never allowed myself to take those thoughts seriously because of our professional relationship. And because I thought you were married. I understand that, he said quietly. And I would never want to do anything that would make you uncomfortable or put your position at the company at risk. But, I prompted, sensing there was more he wanted to say. But I also believe that sometimes, when there's a genuine connection between two people, it deserves to be explored. Not rushed, not forced, but not ignored either. The car felt incredibly small suddenly, the space between us charged with potential. I was hyper-aware of every detail, the soft classical music still playing in the background, the distant lights of the city, the warmth of the car against the cool night outside, and James, looking at me with an expression that made it clear he was waiting for me to decide what happened next. Maybe we should get back on the road, I suggested, not because I wanted to end the conversation, but because I needed a moment to process everything that had just been revealed. James nodded, starting the car again. Of course. As we pulled back onto the parkway, he added, "For what it's worth, I meant what I said about the route. It is calmer, more beautiful. Sometimes the longer path is worth taking." The metaphor wasn't lost on me. As we continued our drive, now heading more directly toward my apartment, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: favorite books, travel destinations we'd loved, music we enjoyed. But underneath it all was a new awareness, a recognition of possibilities that hadn't existed before tonight. When we finally pulled up outside my apartment building, nearly 45 minutes after leaving the office, I felt as though we'd traveled much further than the physical distance would suggest. James put the car in park, but left the engine running, turning to face me. "Thank you for the ride," I said, feeling the inadequacy of the words. "And for being honest." "Thank you for listening," he replied. "And for not jumping out of the car when I made things awkward." His smile was self-deprecating, but his eyes were serious. I hesitated, my hand on the door handle. "What happens tomorrow?" "At work?" "Tomorrow, I'm your boss, and you're my brilliant team member, and we continue to do our jobs excellently," he said firmly. "Nothing changes professionally." "But," he added, his voice softening, "now we both know there's more to the story. And maybe, when the time is right, we can figure out what that means." I nodded, appreciating his clarity about maintaining professional boundaries while acknowledging the personal connection we'd established. "Good night, James," I said, finally opening the door. "Good night," he replied. "Sleep well." As I walked up to my building, I could feel him watching, waiting until I was safely inside before driving away. Once in my apartment, I stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the street, its taillights eventually vanishing around a corner. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying every moment of the drive, every word of our conversation, searching for hidden meanings or signs I might have misinterpreted. By morning, I still wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to happen next, but I knew that something fundamental had shifted between us. When I arrived at the office the next day, everything appeared normal on the surface. James greeted me professionally in the morning meeting, distributed assignments with his usual efficiency, and maintained an appropriate distance throughout the day. But there were moments, a lingering glance across the conference table, a brief touch of his hand on my shoulder as he passed my desk, a private smile when we happened to make the same observation about a client's feedback, that confirmed what we both now knew. The long way home had taken us somewhere new, somewhere with potential we had yet to fully explore. As the weeks passed, we developed a careful dance of professional respect and personal connection. We never discussed that night directly while at work, but occasionally, when a project ran late or a team celebration extended into the evening, James would offer me a ride home. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes he would miss the turn again, taking us along that riverside parkway where we could talk freely, getting to know each other outside the constraints of our professional roles. I don't know yet where this journey will ultimately lead us. There are still complications to navigate, boundaries to respect, and timing to consider. But I've come to appreciate the wisdom in what James said that first night. Sometimes the longer path is worth taking. Sometimes the most meaningful connections develop not in rushing toward a destination, but in savoring the journey along the way. Total _count, 13,756.